Welcome back. In this part of the chapter, we'll be actually covering the events that were happening during the French Revolution, what social formation, what social gathering were taking place, and what were the different timelines, what were the different watershed moments that led to the flourishing of this revolution. So let's get started. Now we have seen that Louis XVI, he had demanded an increment in the taxes. All right. So on 5 May 1789, he gathered the assembly of the Estates General, means the three estates that were divided, that the society was divided into: the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. So he gathered those people and he said that he wanted to propose for some new taxes. All right. The first and the second estates, they sent 300 representatives, while the third estate had 600 representatives. And how privileged the first and the second estate were, that could be determined by this sentence over here, that they were seated in that assembly hall, whereas the members of the third estate, they were made to stand. All right. And the poor people, all right, the poorest people of the third estate, that is the peasants and the artisans and women, okay, they were not even denied entry into the assembly hall. So they were not even allowed that permission to stand and witness what was going on. Rather, they were barred entry. Okay, and the grievances of the members of the third estate, they were read by their representatives via some 40,000 letters. All right. So the king, he brought together all these estates so that he could propose for that increment in tax, whereas the third estate, they gave their demand, and um, they also supplemented, they also requested that a change should be implemented about how things go on. All right. So earlier what used to happen, that there are three estates, that the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. So earlier what used to happen, that each estate had the right to vote only once. All right. So each estate had the right to cast only one vote. Okay, each estate had one vote. So you saw that how many representatives they came, right? 300 represent, so almost 150 representatives each, say, of the clergy and the nobility, and 600 from the third estate. So out of all those people, only one vote was casted on behalf of each estate. So naturally, the two estates would hover over the third estate. They would try to subjugate and suppress them, right? So what the third estate, it demanded that each member would have one vote. Okay, so the assembly as a whole should be taken into account. Each member should have that right to represent its own law, to represent its own say government. Okay, so each member would have one vote. That is what the third estate, it demanded. All right. So this was basically a very democratic outlook, a democratic principle. This was one of the democratic principles that were put forward by philosophers like Rousseau, that we have already covered in the last part in his book, The Social Contract. Okay. So the Rousseau, he did talk about some kind of social contract between the people and between the chosen representatives. So now the third estate people, the common people, they were demanding and these rights, that they were reading through these philosophers, and they demanded that there should be a channel, there should be a medium of government, and there should be a proportionate division of power between the people who were ruling and between the people who were being ruled. And in order for that to happen, each member should have a say, because how can you take into account a decision on behalf of so many people when only you're taking one vote into account. All right, one vote into account for this huge population. That was unfair. So when the king rejected this proposal, naturally he would reject, because the king wanted to suppress the common people. Members of the third estate, they walked out of the assembly in protest. So okay, so in May, okay, this happened. This request by the third estate for the right of each member should vote, that happened. And when the king rejected their proposal, a protest happened that led to the flourishment of the French Revolution. National Assembly, the representatives of the third estate, they viewed themselves as spokesmen for the whole of the French nation. All right. So on 20th June, they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court and declared themselves as National Assembly, and swore not to disperse till they had drafted a constitution for France that would limit the powers of the monarch. So those few representatives of the third estate that spoke on behalf of the common people, all right, they said that okay, the king is not agreeing to our demands, so we are going to form another an alternate a proposal, an alternate constitution, and we will see to it that this constitution is put into force. All right, so they declared themselves as National Assembly, okay, and they swore that the huge autocratic power that the despotic monarch, all right, is enjoying, that would be that he would be stricken off, all right, and we would form another constitutional laws, another laws that would represent the whole of the people, the whole of the common people. The leaders of this National Assembly were Mirabeau and Abbe Sieyès, okay, or Sieyès. So Mirabeau was born in a noble family, but he convinced that he should help the poor and the needy. So he brought out a journal and delivered powerful speeches to the crowds assembled at Versailles. So he was one of those people who stepped out of his powers that he had derived from his birth, and he decided that what is unfair, and I'm gonna be on the side of the poor and the needy. And Abbe Sieyès, originally he was a priest, okay, and he wrote an influential pamphlet called "What is the Third Estate?" So these two members from the first estate, that is the clergy, Abbe Sieyès and Mirabeau from the nobility, they came out in recognition of the unfair treatment that the third estate people were being subjected to. And what was happening in the countryside? So this is happening in the town hall, right? What was happening in the countryside? In the countryside, there was further crisis and turmoil. All right, and why? Because obviously there was a subsistence crisis going on. There was a demand of bread, and the prices of bread, they were increased. Okay, and a severe winter, calamity, a climate calamity that had led to a bad harvest. All right, that meant that the price of bread rose. Okay, so what we are witnessing here is the subsistence crisis. Okay, this calamity, severe winter that led to a bad harvest further led to the increment in the prices of the bread. In such situations, the bakers, what they did, they exploited the situation and they hoarded supplies. All right, naturally the people who are working for their families, sweating so much and giving all of themselves, and you increase the prices for them, so they would, either enter into a frenzy state or would demand their right by law. So their demand by law was not being paid any heed to. All right, so they took the powers to their hands and they exploited the situation and they hoarded supplies. So basically this led to a food riot, all right, that we had seen in that chain of subsistence crisis. So this led to a sort of a food riot, and after spending hours in long queues at the bakery, when they finally came up and saw that either all the food had been exhausted or the prices were so much, so crowds of angry women, they stormed into the shops and they started procuring items for themselves. The Bastille and the countryside. At the same time, the king ordered troops to move into Paris, and on 14 July, an agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the Bastille. All right. So you remember in the first slide we had read about Bastille, that a group of angry men and women, they storming towards the town hall. So this is what was happening in Bastille during that time. So the countryside, a sort of a food riot, subsistence crisis was happening in the town towards the assembly. The third estate representatives, they had formed themselves into a national assembly and they were demanding for their rights to be represented. Meanwhile, on 14 July, an agitated crowd, they stormed against the king, in a form of a protest. All right. In the countryside, rumors that the lords of the manor had hired bands of brigands who were on their way to destroy the ripe crop spread. Okay, so rumors and others spread that lead to stampede, that, oh, you are trying to form a food riot, you are trying to, steal the products and not pay for them. So what the lords are going to do, they are going to come and they're going to destroy all your ripe crops. This was a rumor that was spread, and another rumor that spread was that manorial dues, they were going to be, increased and all that. Okay, so the peasants, what they started to do, they started looting and they started hoarding and they started burning down. So this led to a sort of frenzy. Okay, this led to a sort of protest, and that protest ultimately took the form of a riot. Okay, so what was happening here is that a large number of nobles, they fled from their homes, and many of them migrated to neighboring countries. So naturally, the population of the third estate was more as compared to that of the first and the second estate. So when the third estate took themselves as the powerful, all right, took the power into their reigns, so the people, the rich nobles, they got scared, and some of them, they even shifted and migrated to the neighboring countries in order to live safely. This led to the feudalism, abolishment of the feudalism. So finally, Louis XVI, he accorded recognition to the National Assembly. Riots were happening, and all this unrest was happening. So the king, he had to pay some heed, pay some recognition, so that this situation of unrest could be maintained into some sort of control. All right, it should be the situation could be controlled basically. So to control the situation, he accorded recognition, just recognition. He did not say that I'm gonna, agree to whatever demands you're holding. But he did two very important things. He gave some legal importance to that National Assembly who were going to draft the constitution. He accepted the principle that his powers would now on be checked by a constitution, because he had no other option. Because the power of the people, the common people, they had already taken things into their own accord, into their hands, right? So on the night of 4th August 1789, the Assembly passed a decree abolishing the feudal system of obligations and taxes. Naturally, the king had to abolish the feudal system. All right. When the feudal system would be abolished, then only some stature of legal recognition, legal identity, legal importance in terms of economy and in terms of power could be situated into the hands of the common people. So the king did that. Okay, and members of the clergy too, they were forced to give up their privileges. The government acquired assets worth at least as 2 billion livres as tithes were abolished, and lands owned by the church were confiscated. So this is basically a hoarding of the wealth. They came to know that, oh, the church, they were not using those tithes that they used to collect, rather they have hoarded them for their own personal use. So 2 billion currency, two currencies worth of 2 billion, they were extracted from the church, from the clergy, all right, and then feudal system was abolished, and the National Assembly, that was given legal identity. Key terms that you to remember here are chateau. Chateau is the castle or the stately residence of the rich people, of the nobility, the king or a nobleman. The manor is an estate consisting of the lord's land and his mansion. Okay. France then became a constitutional monarchy. So the king, he said that I'm not gonna, just step down out of my throne. Okay, I am going to be here, but rather alongside, simultaneously, I'm also going to give some power to the constitution. Okay, so a constitutional monarchy came into force in 1791. In 1791, the National Assembly completed the draft of the constitution that they were formulating, and that was meaning to limit the powers of the monarch. So instead of being concentrated in one person's hand, the power was now distributed and was separated and assigned to different groups, different institutions. And these institutions were those three bodies, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. This made France a constitutional monarchy. So what happened to France now? There was a monarch at the head, all right, and he all the absolutism that he used to enjoy, that he could no longer do so. So rather, his power, it came to be limited by three bodies that the National Assembly had drafted in their new constitution. This was the legislature, okay, the body who will come up with the laws, okay, the executive, all right, the body who will propagate all those laws, and the judiciary who will keep everybody in check and would also maintain some safety over the people of France. Okay. A constitutional monarchy, the power of the hereditary ruler is limited by the country's constitution. So now the people's representatives, the chosen electives, okay, the chosen electives, they are at the head alongside of that person who decrees himself to be a ruler just by his divine birth. Okay, so constitutional monarchies usually have a hereditary leader, a constitution, a majority ruling with minority rights and individual freedom. So basically, a body was now formed at the center that would give voice to downtrodden people, and that would also limit and check the absolute power that the king used to enjoy earlier. The monarch holds power, okay, but that is limited by the people, and those people, they are represented through the or by the constitution. Great Britain and Japan are also two countries with constitutional monarchies. Okay, this figure explains how the political system under the constitution of 1791 worked. So you have the king as the executive over here. Okay, so king was made the executive, the monarchy, okay, that was made the executive. And how is the monarchy controlled? The monarchy is controlled by the legislative, the body that formulates laws. Okay, so the body, it formulates laws, and by formulating the laws, by representing all those third estate people, it is basically keeping a check, keeping a control on the executive, that is the king. All right, the king has one power to veto, that means to declare that, you know, this you're going in extreme and I cannot agree to this. So that special power the king still holds. He has the right to veto some of the laws that are being passed by the legislature. All right, this legislature is controlled by a group of ministers. Okay, they are legislature has a lot of members, as you can see over here, around 745 members, and they basically control the ministry. Okay, this ministry is also sort of responsible for execution. All right, so this ministry is responsible for execution and to, you know, keeping in check about how the king is also executing his the laws, and how or whether the laws that are being formulated, they are being executed equally amongst all. All right, electors are those men only, around 50,000 in number. So what happens is that the third estate people, they are divided into two categories of citizens: active citizens and the passive citizens. All right, active citizens, they are entitled to vote. Okay, so about 4 million of a population of 28 million. And you have to remember that only men that used to hold property, they were allowed to vote. Okay, and they used to elect some electors, say 50,000, and out of those 50,000 electors, legislature and another group called the assembly, a minister, that used to form. All right, and the other group, that is the passive citizens, they had no voting rights. So this included all those people who had no property, especially the men, and of course all women. Okay, they had no voting rights, about 3 million, also children and youth below the age of 25. Okay, and another set of people, another, you know, group of people that the active citizens had the right to vote was for the judge, the judiciary. Okay, so the active citizens, those people who had, those men who had property, they were allowed to vote. They were allowed to elect some people, out of which the legislature and was formed, the people who formulated law, and the legislature, it controlled a group of ministers that used to execute and see whether things were functioning properly. There was the king, of course, as the head of the executive, and king had a right to veto, had to nullify some of the laws and modify some of the laws that the legislature passed. And the legislature, naturally, it kept the king in control by formulating the laws. Then the active citizens also used to vote for the judge, all right, who used to keep everybody else in control. And there was also another part of the society, the passive citizens, they had no voting rights, basically the women, those men who had no property, children, and of course youth below the age of 25. The Constitution of 1791, it vested the power to make laws in the National Assembly, which was indirectly elected, all right, and citizens voted for a group of electors who in turn chose the assembly. Indirectly elected, of course, because citizens, they group a handful of people, and out of those handful of people, another handful of people were elected that formed the legislature. So that is what is meant here by the indirect election. Only men above 25 years of age who paid taxes. Naturally, those people who will own property, only those people would pay taxes. It's very, this two logic works hand in hand, right? If you don't have money, how will you pay tax? So those people who used to pay tax, who used to have their own property, and of above 25 years of age, equal to at least 3 days of laborer's age. Only those were given the status of active citizens and they were entitled to vote, and the remaining men and all women, they fall under the category of passive citizens. To qualify as an elector and then as a member of the legislature assembly, a man had to belong to the highest bracket of taxpayers. Okay, and now how would it then be decided that okay, active citizens are electing, but who will they elect? All right. Now a lot of people would say that I also paid this amount of tax that qualifies the category, but no, there would be naturally some people who would pay the highest bracket of tax, and only those people, they were elected by these active citizens, and out of also those people, the highest bracket of taxpayers, they were only taken into consideration while picking up members for the legislature. Okay. The constitution also started maintaining and started declaring some rights that should be equally distributed towards all men and even women. Even women, that was just being said, but actually that was not being so performed. Okay. Rights such as right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law were established as natural and inalienable rights, means that those rights that cannot be snatched away from those citizens. And it was the duty of the state to protect each citizen's natural rights. Okay, this is you can take this to be a parallel of the fundamental rights. All right, and there were certain political symbols that came about when the constitutional monarchy came into force, because a revolution happened. All right, some laws that were in rigorous practice, that were suddenly outstripped. All right, those laws were declared null and null. Okay, and to take place of all those regressive laws, new laws were coming up. So some political symbols, they took their place in France. One of those was the broken chain. The chain was used to fetter slaves, and a broken chain stands for the act of becoming free. You know that how slaves, they were being carried by chains so that they cannot they cannot move away freely here to there. All right, so they were fettered, they were chained by using these steel chains. All right, so liberty, this stands for liberty. This broken chain stands for liberty, stands for freedom, that they have broken the shackles of monarchy. All right, and they have gained that right to represent themselves. The bundle of rods or fasces, that one rod, one single person, that cannot go and topple all of these hierarchical laws. All right, you need the unity of all the people. All right, so unity was being represented by this bundle of rods. All right, and the third was this figure, the eye within a triangle radiating light. This stands for knowledge. The all-seeing eye stands for knowledge. The rays of the sun will drive away the clouds of ignorance. Means you cannot just sit there and decree yourself as to be the person that has the divine right and that's going to rule above everyone. Okay, rather you can defeat this kind of logic by educating yourself, by gathering and gaining knowledge, and by also agitating people to read this, okay, to understand this, to educate yourself, to gain that insight, and protest against those people who think themselves to be above law. Other symbol were a scepter, a symbol of royal power. You can see over here. All right, this you must have seen in some, even in some TV shows that represent the medieval era. This scepter stands for the royal power. Then you have the snake biting its tail to form a ring, almost like a circle. Okay, this is the symbol of eternity, because a ring or a circle, it has neither a beginning nor an end. All right, so this represents eternity. Okay, and a red Phrygian cap. This cap was worn by a slave upon becoming free. So this was again a symbol that used to denote liberty or used to denote freedom. The red caps worn by these slaves, that used to signify that I am no longer a slave of the society, or no longer a slave of the state. Rather, I am a free citizen and I have my own equal fundamental rights. And blue, white, red, this is the other national colors of France: blue, white, and red. And the last set of symbols are a winged woman. This is the personification of the law of course, always remember this irony that the women, they were not allowed to represent themselves via the elective assembly. Okay, but the law that was being personified means that was being attributes of a human via the female figure. Okay, this is the this is a very big irony. All right, so the winged woman is the woman is a personification of the law, whereas the law tablet that you can see over here, it stands for equality. Okay, it stands for the right that the law is the same for all, no one is above law. Okay, and all are equal before it. So these uh, these are things that you need to remember while you are talking about the revolution. These are the different moments, and these are the different symbols that occurred while the French Revolution was gaining its prominence.